Hello, and once again, welcome to the program, Your Local Government. I'm Bob Miller with Blue Ridge Communications, and this is the program where we look at your local government. We're going off topic just a bit today, and we're actually going to be in a series studying various political parties and persuasions and trying to understand what they are. Our title today is What is an Independent? And this would be an interesting program, and to help us understand is Nick Troiano, who is an independent person who may be running for political office. And Nick, this is the first time on the show we've had anyone who's actually considered themselves an independent, so thank you for being the first.
Pleasure to be here with you, Bob.
We'd like to learn about you just a little bit first, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, careers you've had, and what got you interested in being an independent political person.
Sure. Well, I'm born and raised from Milford, Pennsylvania, which is in Pike County, in the northeast part of the state. And I really got interested in politics as I got involved in my community, first in student council and then as part of our school board in the community. And I decided I wanted to go to Washington to study, to learn about politics and get some hands-on experience. So over the last 6 years, I've studied American government at Georgetown University, where I recently graduated with my master's degree, and also got involved in leading and starting organizations in the political and fiscal reform space, because it wasn't soon after I got to Washington that I realized that our country's broke, both politically and fiscally, and it's going to be my generation and future Americans who will have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. So I felt some sort of responsibility to get involved right away as a young person. And as you mentioned, now I've returned back home and I'm considering running for Congress this year as an independent candidate from Pennsylvania's 10th District.
Mm-hmm. I think most people would agree that the current political system is broken and that the country is broke as well. When you look at the debt and how long it would take to pay that back if we ever could, it's just crushing with no end in sight. It seems like the solution is spend just a little bit more, and that will come to an end. Now, help us understand what an independent is. I think most people are familiar with Republicans, Democrats, perhaps even libertarians, but independent is a slightly different thought. So help us understand independent 101, what that is.
Well, there are many independents. In fact, there are more independents now than there ever have been in our recent history. About 42% of Americans, according to Gallup, now say they're independent. And what that basically means is people who want to evaluate candidates and public policy on their merits rather than just their party affiliation or ideology. And in some recent research, Pew asked people, why do you consider yourself an independent? The number one reason is that they believed both parties cared more about special interests than the national interest. Mm-hmm. And special interests, whether that's teachers' unions or trial lawyers on the Democratic side or big business and corporations on the Republican side, people feel like both parties aren't well representing them now. The second reason was that people like some ideas that Democrats have and some ideas that Republicans have or the Green Party or Libertarian Party have, and want to be able to put together their own platform rather than simply ascribe to what a particular party has to say. Sure. So that may mean, when you mentioned the debt, you want to maybe raise some more revenue while also cutting spending. Mm-hmm. There isn't a party that ascribes to that. They force you to make sort of arbitrary choices at the ballot box.
Sure, I'm sure there's many people, particularly with social issues, on both sides of the spectrum. You can have Democrats that are pro-life, or you could have Republicans that are pro-choice, and they're in a box. And so, are you saying that's the kind of thinking that gets people wanting to have an independent? That you're not locked into ideology that goes along with fiscal policy?
Yeah, absolutely. Many people consider themselves, like I do, to be more socially libertarian and fiscally conservative. But there isn't a party out there that sort of represents that viewpoint. So I think that's why people, especially in light of how dysfunctional our politics has gotten, consider themselves to be independent. Mm-hmm. And in fact, another interesting poll showed that 60% of Americans think that both parties are doing such a terrible job that either a third is needed or some other type of movement outside of both parties, upwards of 60%. Mm-hmm. And now, for the first time ever, because of the kind of communications technology that we have at our disposal, I think that movement is going to be able to organize itself and express itself in ways that we've never seen before. You know, imagine a Ross Perot type candidacy now, when Ross Perot got 19% of the vote when the internet didn't exist back then.
Exactly. Yeah, I think a good example of that is what happened in Egypt, how Twitter and Facebook actually brought down a government. That's almost unheard of. So the social media is bringing power back to the people. Obviously, you must be seeing somewhat of a growth. Is it a slow growth? Has it speeded up over time? Is it exponentially increasing? What is your perspective of how the interest in independent candidates is happening?
I think the interest in independence has dramatically risen over the past few years, specifically because of the constant budget brinksmanship that's been happening in Washington. Democrats can't seem to work with Republicans and vice versa to put our budget on a sustainable path, and so we lurk from crisis to crisis. Most recently, the government shutdown that happened last fall. And people look at that and they say, why can't our elected leaders put us before their party? And in that feeling of disgust, they're looking outside both parties for new candidates, which is why I feel if I decide to run for Congress this year, I'll be able to attract support from Republicans, Democrats, and independents, those who are so sick of politics as usual that they might be willing to try something new to challenge the status quo.
Sure. One of the things that everybody knows, if you're a Republican and you're in the House, John Boehner is going to be telling you what to do, and others, the Democrats have the same side in the Senate. Harry Reid's going to tell them what to do, and they actually talk about how they corral their people and get them into line and make sure they vote for what they want. So what you're saying then, as an independent, you wouldn't have any party leadership telling you, here's what you got to do, strong arming you to get you to follow that party line.
Correct. If you run as an independent, you have to campaign and win the support of all the electorate, not just the base of your party that might vote in a primary election. Now in Pennsylvania, we have something called closed primaries, where you have to be registered with a party to participate, and independents are excluded from them. So in a district like mine, you can win your congressional seat basically by winning your Republican primary, since Republicans have a majority of the party affiliation in the district. Well, that tends to produce two polarized choices for people on election day, those that represent the base of the Republican Party, more conservative, and those that represent the base of the Democratic Party, more liberal. And I've heard it said that Americans are always looking to vote for an eagle, but they're given choices between a chicken and a duck. And I think if we reform our primary process, or we have candidates who circumvent it, as I would do if I decide to run, then you can have candidates who can win a plurality support from all the people.
Right. You mentioned there's a closed primary, but we probably ought to just explain that a little bit. You're saying in the primary that comes up in May, independents won't be on the ballot. They would only be in the general election in November.
Correct.
Okay.
And furthermore, both parties seem to disagree on everything, but one thing they do agree on is to make it tough for any new competition to express itself in our electoral process. So for example, in Pennsylvania, if I decide to run, I would have to collect 3.5 times the amount of petition signatures than a Democrat or Republican. And statewide, that gap is even larger. There's a bill pending in our state legislature that would reform what we call ballot access, the regulations in order to get on the ballot, to make it more fair and more democratic.
Absolutely. Okay, there's a lot we want to talk about. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after these few words. Stay with us. And welcome back to the program, Your Local Government. I'm Bob Miller. My guest today is Nick Troiano, and our subject today is what is an independent? And Nick is considering running for a congressional seat in his hometown of Milford, Pennsylvania, which interestingly is also part of the Blue Ridge Communications area, but quite a distance from us. You were involved with something called Americans Elect, and this is a nonpartisan movement to draft an independent candidate for the president in 2012. So tell us about that, Nick.
Well, I first got involved in this effort to reimagine the way that we pick our president back in 2006 with a true visionary in politics named Doug Bailey, who basically said, we have all this great technology at our disposal. How can we use it to improve our democratic process in the way that we pick our president? Now, if you remember, every 4 years, the way that we get our two candidates is through a seemingly arbitrary system of primaries in Iowa and New Hampshire. And if you live in a state like Pennsylvania or others, your voice doesn't much matter. So the idea of Americans Elect was, why not hold a national online convention where every registered voter can participate to nominate a set of candidates, maybe a Democrat with a Republican or vice versa, a bipartisan ticket that can represent all of the people rather than the candidates from both parties who are representing their political party. And in doing so, it would not only expand the number of people who can participate in our nomination process for president, but it will also expand the pool of potential candidates who might not be able to get through the Republican or Democratic primaries, as we've seen the sort of circuses they have become lately. So Americans Elect petitioned and got over 2.5 million signatures to get on the ballot in a few dozen states and set up this online nominating process. Unfortunately, a candidate didn't step forward to seek the nomination with great enough support, but it was a good step towards reimagining the way that our political process can work in the 21st century.
What would be the safeguard to ensure that Republicans don't try to push a Democrat they know can't win, or vice versa? I mean, that's always a concern, that, you know, people will cross file to vote for the person they think is least qualified so their person can get in.
That's a very good question, but as our founders envisioned, the people are the ultimate safeguard of our democracy, and the more people who participate, the less of a chance that the system would be gamed. And I think if a few candidates start running through a process like this, it will attract a lot of support. But you know, Thomas Jefferson said that we don't have a democracy that's representative of a majority of the people. It's representative of the majority of people who participate, which is why it's so important that people who are disgusted with politics as usual don't refrain from the system, but rather re-engage with the system if they really want to have their voice heard.
Sure. You made a good point. There is disgust with politics as it is now, and many people are just disengaging. They just feel they can't make any impact. No matter what they do, it's not going to matter. So does this revitalize the opportunity for people to become engaged? Is that what you're learning, that people may believe there's some hope? It's rather than just give up, that there is some hope here?
Well, people rightly feel like they can't make a positive difference through the way our current political process works. I mean, look at what we've done on a federal level in Washington. We've tried virtually every combination of party control between the White House and both branches, both houses of our legislative branch. Now, if we're able to get more independent candidates running, people might actually have someone to vote for, and that will bring more people into the process who right now are so disgusted that they've turned away from it. And interestingly, when Ross Perot ran for president a little over 20 years ago, almost a third of his support came from people who wouldn't have otherwise voted in that election.
Right. Demographically, does it pull equally from Republican and Democrat, or is there one party that has more of a predisposition to go independent?
Well, just building off the Perot example, about equal percentage of his votes came from Democrats and Republicans. So true sort of moderate or centrist independents can pull equally from both sides. But I think what we have seen more recently in the way that our two parties have been governing or have not been governing is that Republican affiliation and identification has fallen to a record low in 25 years. And that's largely attributed to sort of a rightward lurch that the Tea Party has brought the Republicans. And so there are fewer and fewer moderate Republicans. In fact, when I first registered to vote at 18, I was a Republican. I've been all my life until the government shutdown happened, and that was the last straw for me. And I thought I could make more of a difference outside the Republican Party as an independent, while still drawing on the best ideas from both sides. But I think nowadays a lot of independents are coming from a Republican Party that doesn't seem to represent them anymore.
Right. I think that same could be said of the Democratic Party. There's many people that we call the Reagan Democrats, and that are not really too keen on the way the Democratic Party is going now as well.
Absolutely. I mean, there are no more what they call blue dog Democrats, the real fiscal conservatives in the House. The House and the Senate have completely polarized. 20 years ago, about 58 members of our United States Senate fit between the most liberal Republican and the most conservative Democrat. That was the overlap. Today, there are 0 members between the most liberal Republican and the most conservative Democrat. There's just been a great pulling apart and polarization. The center has fallen out.
Being a student of politics, I'm sure you discussed this. Why did this happen? Why did we become more polarized? We've asked this question many times. We've observed it. We never analyzed. How did that middle fall out and everybody run to the corners?
Well, I think it's important first to recognize that our choices have polarized, but the American people have not. And there's a large body of research that suggests that our politics aren't as divided as ordinary Americans are. In fact, most Americans can probably agree over coffee on a common ground on the major issues we face.
Sure.
But what's caused the polarization at the elite level has been a mixture of money in politics, our media environment, your Fox News, your MSNBC narrowcasting to particular audiences, and also changes in our electoral system like partisan gerrymandering, where we're creating more safe districts now than ever before, where there really isn't a competition between both parties. And that produces members who are more to the right or more to the left.
Sure. I think probably 20, 30 years from now, they'll be studying the MSNBCs and Fox News as to how news organizations that used to be kind of center have actually gone. So people watch the news station that then reinforces their belief system.
Right. People are seeking more affirmation than information now, and it's become echo chambers where people aren't necessarily getting the facts, but are getting exactly what makes them feel more comfortable in their beliefs.
Sure.
And I think that's very dangerous for an electorate to remain educated and informed and ultimately responsible for our democracy.
Well, just as you said, there's independents coming along that might have views from both sides. Do you see any media coming up that would be truly fair and balanced, that would show both sides of the equation and not have a bias in either direction?
Well, I think the ultimate responsibility for a healthy media consumption rests with the individual. We have more outlets for information and news gathering than ever before, and it's sort of up to us as good citizens to seek out that information, to read from various sources and come to our own decisions rather than relying one particular source to tell us how it is. And I think media literacy is something that through public education we can put much more of a focus on moving forward.
Sure. Now the political parties, didn't get there by making too many mistakes. So if they see there's a real interest in independents who are more centered, then they're probably going to start saying, "Hey, we've got to do this, or we're out of the game." Do you see them realizing that, or do you think they're so stuck in their ways that they'll self-destruct?
Well, I think that's an astute observation, because what movements outside of our two parties have caused before is one party who wants to win over those voters change the way it does business. And so I think the mission of the independent movement isn't to create a third party or to end the two parties, it's to transcend the two parties and transcend them in a way that creates a new market of voters that one of the parties wants to come after and scoop up.
Interesting. Absolutely interesting. Okay, it's time for a break, and we'll be right back after these few words. Stay with us. And welcome back to the final segment of Your Local Government. Our subject is what is an independent, and our guest is Nick Troiano. And again, Nick, thank you for being with us. One of the big concerns that you mentioned earlier is the budget we have and the national debt. Clearly out of control, and it seems as though the current approach is, gee, let's just spend a little bit more and that'll fix it. So what is your perspective?
Well, our national debt is a problem. We're at $17 trillion now and growing, even many more trillions of dollars in unfunded obligations into the future. And if we remain on this current path, what that'll basically mean is that we won't be able to afford the promises we've made in the past or make crucial investments in our future. And unfortunately, both parties have joined together to keep kicking the can down the road, doing very little to solve this problem in fundamental ways that will require both reforming our main entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and also reforming our tax code in a way that will also raise some more revenue. Now, I've spent the last year and a half co-founding and leading an organization called The Can Kicks Back, because as young people, we're the ones being kicked down the road.
Absolutely.
And we've worked closely with both Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson, who co-chaired the President's Fiscal Commission, to advance sensible bipartisan proposals to deal with our debt. And we're a long way from getting there, but the more people who get involved and put pressure on their elected leaders, the closer we're going to get to a so-called fiscal grand bargain, where we'll be able to put our country on a more sustainable path.
Sure. It seems as though we're soon going to be able to have a can that can't be kicked anymore, as you said. And what are your thoughts on the countries that lend us the money, as far as China? Is there any concern that they'll eventually say, we're done, we don't have any more, we're not going to fund this? And what kind of economic upheaval could that create?
Well, I think from an international perspective, there's a reason why Admiral Mike Mullen said our national debt is our greatest national security risk as well. We're becoming very dependent and linked to the countries who are lending us money, including countries like China, which I had an opportunity to spend a few weeks in earlier this year. So there's definitely international implications for our debt, and that's all the more reason why we should be focused on long-term deficit reduction.
Sure. Any thoughts on energy exploration in this country? When you look at Russia, how strong they are, it's because they have a lot of energy. Would you be in favor of pushing more towards natural gas and other resources, or taking the more cautious, we shouldn't be doing any more because of environmental concerns?
Well, I think that there are valid and important concerns about natural gas, in particular exploration and development, especially within our state of Pennsylvania. But I think we have to find a way to use these natural resources in a way that's both sustainable and safe. And I'm confident that we'll be able to do that. And I also think exporting more natural gas is a good thing, something that we should expedite because there's plenty of supply here, and exporting a lot of the research that's been done isn't going to lead to significantly higher prices domestically. And like you said, I think the one positive impact to doing that, besides our own economic growth, is allowing countries to become less dependent upon some countries like Russia, and that plays into the situation unfolding in Ukraine right now.
Sure. I was going to say, let's move right into Ukraine, because you could certainly make an argument that we have somewhat of an interest in whether Ukraine joins back up with Russia, moves with the European Union, but there's that argument of how much do we risk ourselves for things that are happening over there, and I guess we could do like 5 shows on that, but where do you weigh in on that? How much involvement should we have in, like, for example, the Ukrainian situation?
Well, I think right now it's in the interest of our country to work closely and cooperatively with our European allies and NATO to first promote peace, because it very easily can become destabilizing and outbreaks of violence because of the ethnic differences in the country. Second, to protect the Ukrainian people's right to self-determination, both politically and economically, which is what first caused this debacle in the first place. And third, to push back against the aggressive actions of Russia in violating the sovereignty of the Ukraine and various international agreements in their current presence in the Crimea Peninsula. So I think that must be done along with our allies. But I also think I would caution against us reverting back to a sort of Cold War mentality. It's very different. Both of our countries have progressed a lot in the last 20 years. Russia was also a country I spent about 10 days in as part of a delegation of young leaders. And I think there is opportunity, and I'm optimistic that both of our countries can develop closer and more productive and constructive relationships.
Sure, let's hope so. Do you think, I think historically we're going to see that the administration really bumbled Syria by drawing a line, and oh no, I really didn't draw a line. And do you think something like that emboldened a Putin, that he can basically do what he wants without impunity?
Well, unfortunately, I think that we, under our current presidency and in recent international incidents like Syria, we have weakened our international posture such that foreign leaders, including Putin, don't take us as seriously and don't take our word as seriously. And that only is going to be regained over a longer period of time when we mean what we say and say what we mean.
The question becomes when Obama said there's going to be consequences, were they laughing in the Kremlin? I guess that's the question. Were they snickering over that, yeah, we can do whatever we want to do? We're running short on time. Very quickly, your thoughts on immigration reform?
Well, immigration reform is an imperative from both a moral perspective and economic perspective. Unfortunately, because of the way our dysfunctional political system works, there's little hope of getting it done in an election year. But it ought to be done, and it ought to focus both on securing our border, on developing a path to legalization if people here, the 11 million people here, meet a range of criteria, and also on modernizing our immigration procedures, because the truth is we have a lot to be gained economically as a country by retaining and attracting high-skilled immigrant workers and people who want to start businesses here.
Sure. And Nick, we're running out of time. I want to give you an opportunity for closing comments.
Well, my closing comments is that despite all we have working against us in politics right now, and the parties and the big money and all the rest, I think our founders were right to entrust the people with ultimate guardianship over our democracy. And The good point about this is that everyone out there listening now has the most power of anyone else, and that's the right to vote, and I hope we exercise it well.
Well, Nick, it's been a pleasure to have you here. People like you give me hope for the future, so keep up the good work.
Thank you very much.